So if I told you to just sit perfectly still, right, and remain completely silent for 5 full seconds after someone asks you a direct question.
Oh, I'd hate that.
Right. You'd probably feel this profound sense of anxiety. I mean, in our modern conversational rhythm, a 5 second pause feels like it's a violation of the social contract.
Yeah, it's what we call dead air.
Exactly, dead air. It's what we fear most in an interview or on a first date or even just chatting with a neighbor. We're totally conditioned to view that silence as a failure of communication.
Right. It means something went wrong.
But today, we are diving into a document that deliberately weaponizes that exact agonizing silence. Like, it uses it to physically rewire the human brain.
It really is a remarkable piece of instructional engineering.
It is. And, welcome to the deep dive, everyone. What we're analyzing today is, on the surface, a syllabus.
Yeah, a highly rigid set of instructions designed for teaching an interactive English lesson to what they call an A2 or elementary level learner.
Right. But viewing it purely as a lesson plan kind of misses the underlying brilliance.
Completely misses it. Because it's essentially a behavioral script for the instructor. It's meticulously designed to manage the cognitive load of the learner.
And that is the angle that completely hooked me. We aren't just looking at a list of basic vocabulary words or, verb conjugations.
Yeah, I know.
We are looking at a master class in scaffolding. I mean, it reads like the choreography for a really intricate psychological dance.
That's a great way to put it.
Every single step the teacher takes, every constraint they place on their own speech, and every forced pause is calculated.
Yeah, it's all about building the learner's confidence from the ground up, right? While actively preventing the brain's natural threat detection systems from just shutting down the whole learning process.
I want you to think about the last time you tried to learn a brand new skill, like maybe a new language or even a complex sport. Did you feel overwhelmed?
Most people do, yeah.
Well, this deep dive is going to show you exactly how to avoid that feeling of information overload. And it's a principle you can apply to your own learning journeys.
The constraints are really what make it so fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Because to teach effectively at this foundational level, the instructor has to completely dismantle their own fluency.
Oh, that's such a good point. We take our native language completely for granted.
Right. We don't think about the neurobiology of retrieving a word, formatting it into a grammatically correct syntax, and sending the signal to our motor cortex.
To actually make the sound.
Exactly. It happens in milliseconds for us. But for a beginner, that process is a heavy, conscious, really exhausting labor.
So this document essentially forces the teacher to align their output with the biological limits of the student's working memory.
Precisely.
So let's look closely at those limits, because the source document establishes what I can really only describe as a linguistic straitjacket for the teacher right out of the gate.
It is strict. Very strict.
Extremely. The baseline rules dictate that the instructor must speak slowly, use simple A2 vocabulary, and completely eliminate difficult grammar and idioms. But most importantly, it enforces a strict limitation on sentence length. Every single sentence the teacher speaks must fall strictly between 5 and 12 words.
And that 5 to 12 word parameter is really the structural linchpin of the entire methodology.
Why that specific number, though? Like, why not just say keep it short?
Well, if we look at how working memory functions specifically through the lens of something called the phonological loop,
Yeah.
the human brain can only hold a very small amount of acoustic information in active processing.
Before it just decays, right?
Before it decays, which is only a few seconds. When you're listening to a language you're just beginning to learn, you are effortlessly absorbing concepts.
You doing math.
Basically, you are engaging in a highly resource-intensive act of phonetic decoding.
You're literally trying to figure out where one word ends and the next one begins.
Yes. The learner is separating a continuous stream of sound into discrete units, right? Then retrieving the semantic meaning of each unit from their long-term memory.
Which takes time.
And then they have to hold those meanings in their working memory long enough to piece together the syntactic relationship between them all.
So if a teacher uses like a 20-word sentence,
they're inevitably going to rely on compound structures, dependent clauses, maybe conjunctions.
and by the time the learner decodes the second half of the sentence, the phonetic memory of the first half has completely vanished.
Exactly. The 5 to 12 word limit physically prohibits the use of complex clauses. It forces the speaker to present one singular, digestible idea at a time.
Okay, I want to push back on that slightly, though, from the perspective of the teacher.
Sure.
Because Trying to artificially cap your sentences at 12 words without sounding incredibly patronizing or robotic is a monumental challenge.
Oh, it's incredibly hard.
We use dependent clauses naturally to soften our language, right? To add nuance, to
Yeah.
sound human.
We do.
Stripping all of that away is, well, it's like telling a Michelin-starred chef they have to prepare a gourmet meal, but they're only allowed to use a microwave and a potato.
That's a great analogy.
It requires a bizarre, completely different type of mastery. You aren't showing off your expansive vocabulary anymore.
Right, you are showing off your ability to distill a concept to its absolute raw essence.
Exactly.
And that limitation forces a profound level of intentionality. When you remove the crutch of complex grammar, you have to be absolutely certain of the core message you want to deliver before you open your mouth.
Which is exhausting in its own way.
It is, and this ties directly into the document's absolute ban on idioms, too.
Oh, let's talk about the idioms, because I find this fascinating.
Yeah, as advanced speakers, we know that idioms are culturally embedded metaphors, but we often forget the cognitive energy required to actually process them.
Because they require an active override of logic.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, assuming the audience knows what an idiom is, the real issue for an A2 learner isn't just that they don't know the phrase, it's the dual processing cost.
Right.
Like if I use an idiom, say, bite the bullet, the learner's brain first translates the literal words. They build a mental image of someone literally biting a bullet.
Which is totally weird in context.
Right. They realize the literal image makes no logical sense in whatever we're talking about, so they have to expend prefrontal cortex energy to suppress that literal image.
And then search for an abstract meaning they likely haven't even learned yet.
It's an immediate cognitive traffic jam.
That's exactly what it is. And that traffic jam leads directly to frustration and alienation.
Oh, totally.
When an idiom fails to land, the learner is painfully reminded of their status as an outsider.
Yeah, they feel like they missed the joke.
By enforcing the 5 to 12 word limit and just outright banning idioms, the methodology establishes a foundational baseline of trust.
Which is so important.
The instructor is essentially signaling, I am providing you with the pure, unadulterated mechanics of communication. There are no hidden traps.
No cultural inside jokes.
Right, and no puzzles you lack the tools to solve.
So establishing that baseline trust is crucial. But staring at a friendly, trustworthy teacher who refuses to use idioms doesn't actually, initiate the learning process.
No, you have to actually start the lesson.
You have to get the engine running. And the document moves from the general style guide into the actual architecture of the lesson, beginning with a highly specific 1 to 2 minute warm-up.
Right.
The instructions state the teacher must introduce the topic, explicitly tell the learner exactly what they're going to learn, and then ask 2 easy questions.
And the brevity of that warm-up is totally intentional. But its psychological function is massive.
Break that down for me. Why is it so rigid?
Well, when a student enters a formal learning environment, particularly one where they're expected to perform a skill, they are actively bad at.
Like speaking a new language.
Right. Their amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, is often hyperactive.
They're nervous.
They are anticipating embarrassment, failure, or confusion. By immediately providing a roadmap, the teacher says, here is our topic, and here is exactly what you will be able to do by the end of this session.
Oh, so they're deactivating that threat response.
Exactly. You are systematically removing the anxiety of the unknown.
That is so smart.
Yes. And following that roadmap immediately with 2 genuinely easy questions shifts the learner's neurological state from passive apprehension to active participation.
It breaks the ice.
And it creates a micro-foundation of success. The brain registers, I understood the input, I formulated a response, and I successfully communicated.
And boom, a tiny hit of dopamine.
Which sets a positive trajectory for the heavier cognitive lifting that follows.
Which brings us to the actual heavy lifting, the vocabulary phase. And the blueprint doesn't just say, teach these words.
No, it's way more structured than that.
It provides a rigid 5-step algorithmic sequence for every single new piece of vocabulary.
Yeah.
The teacher must, 1, pronounce it clearly, 2, explain it in simple English, 3, give 1 contextual example, 4, ask the learner to repeat it, and finally, step 5, execute that mandated 5-second pause.
If you map that 5-step sequence against modern memory encoding theories, it is essentially perfect.
Really? Like down to the biology of it?
Oh, absolutely. Step 1, the clear pronunciation engages the auditory cortex to register the raw phonetic data.
Okay.
Step 2, the simple explanation engages Wernicke's area to assign semantic meaning to those sounds.
So they know what the sound actually
Right.
means.
Step 3, the contextual example, binds that semantic meaning to a real-world scenario. That engages the hippocampus to begin forming an episodic memory.
Wow. And then step 4 moves it from the receptive brain into the productive brain.
Yes.
Because asking them to repeat it physically engages Broca's area and the motor cortex.
Exactly. But it is step 5, that mandatory 5-second silence, that allows all of that neurological firing to actually synchronize.
Wait, the silence.
When we ask a learner to produce a new word, they are searching their newly forming neural pathways. Synapses are literally firing, trying to connect the concept to the motor function required to articulate it.
This goes back to what we touched on at the very beginning of the deep dive, the social anxiety of silence.
Yeah.
If I am the teacher and I ask the student to repeat a word and 2 seconds go by, well, my natural instinct is to jump in and save them.
Of course it is.
I want to repeat the word again or offer a hint because I assume their silence means they're failing.
And by jumping in to save them, you're actually short-circuiting their cognitive process.
Oh, wow. So I'm ruining it by helping.
You're disrupting the internal search mechanism. The 5-second pause is not empty space. It is a period of intense, invisible neurological labor.
So it's not dead air, it's working air.
Providing that silence requires the teacher to override their own social conditioning. It's actually a profound act of empathy.
It really is.
It signals to the student that the teacher understands the difficulty of the task and is willing to just hold the space open while the student's brain does the necessary work.
I love the idea that the silence is doing the heavy lifting. That's a great reframe.
It's vital.
So the vocabulary sequence essentially hands the learner a set of individual, well-formed bricks. But a pile of bricks isn't a house.
No, it's not.
The brain now needs to see how these linguistic bricks are held together with structural mortar in the real world. To do that, the document shifts from broadcasting isolated sounds to building a world, which brings us to the listening practice.
And true to form, the constraints here are incredibly tight.
Unbelievably tight. The teacher is required to tell a short story of strictly 40 to 80 words.
The economy of language required to build a narrative arc in under 80 words is staggering.
Especially using only A2 vocabulary and 5 to 12 word sentences.
Right, but again, it is dictated by the limits of the A2 learner's working memory. If the story stretches to 150 or 200 words, the learner will just lose the thread of the narrative while trying to decode the vocabulary.
The cognitive load gets too heavy?
Exactly. The 40 to 80 word constraint ensures that the entire narrative can be held in the mind simultaneously.
What I find even more compelling than the word count, though, is the delivery method. The blueprint mandates that this micro-story must be read twice.
First, slowly, and then a second time naturally.
Right. And we've talked about phonetic decoding, so I assume the slow read is just about data acquisition. The learner is scanning the audio for the vocabulary bricks they just acquired.
That's right.
But why follow it immediately with the natural read? Like, if they already have the data, what does the natural speed add?
It adds prosody.
Prosody.
Yes. Language is not just semantic data. It is a melody. It has rhythm, intonation, pitch variations, and stress patterns.
Right, the music of it.
During the slow read, the learner is isolating words. But native speakers do not speak in isolated words. We blend them together.
You totally do.
We drop syllables, we link consonants to vowels, our pitch rises at the end of question and falls at the end of a statement.
So the natural read bridges the gap between the sterile textbook pronunciation and the messy melodic reality of how human beings actually communicate.
That dual approach is so vital. If a learner only ever hears slow, hyper-articulated speech, they might develop a vast vocabulary but find themselves completely incapable of understanding a native speaker in a coffee shop.
Right, because real life doesn't sound like a textbook.
The natural read trains their auditory processing to recognize those vocabulary bricks, even when they are smeared together by the mortar of natural prosody.
Smeared together. I love that. So following this dual-layered auditory experience, the blueprint instructs the teacher to verify comprehension by asking exactly 3 questions about the story.
Just 3.
And of course, there's a mandatory 5-second pause after each one. The specificity of the number 3 stands out to me. In a lot of language settings, a teacher might just say, okay, summarize what you just heard in your own words.
Right, which is terrible.
But this document strictly avoids that.
Because asking an A2 learner to summarize a narrative is asking them to perform a massive feat of cognitive juggling.
It's way too much at once.
Summary requires them to simultaneously comprehend the whole thing, Select the most important parts, retrieve the necessary vocabulary to describe those parts, and then format that vocabulary into novel grammatical structures.
It guarantees cognitive overload.
It's testing too many variables at once.
Yes. The rule of three acts as a targeted spotlight. Like 3 carefully designed questions are sufficient to verify that the learner understood the beginning, middle, and end of a 40 to 80 word story.
It proves comprehension without crushing the learner under the immense processing weight of original narrative generation.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time on the receptive side of the equation, how the brain absorbs, decodes, and contextualizes input. But eventually, the training wheels have to come off.
Video.
The learner has to transition from a consumer of language to a producer. This brings us to the speaking and conversation practice, which is arguably where the most anxiety lies for anyone learning a new skill.
Oh, without a doubt.
Speaking is terrifying.
But this is where the curriculum brilliantly leverages subjective experience. In the speaking practice phase, the teacher is instructed to ask open-ended questions like, what do you think? Or what do you usually do? Or which one do you like?
These questions pivot the interaction away from objective facts. You aren't asking them to recall the plot of the microstory anymore. You are asking them to access their own identity.
And that pivot is a massive accelerant for memory retention.
How so?
When a learner is required to form a personal opinion or recall a lived experience using their new vocabulary, they are forging emotional connections to the language.
Tying the emotion to the word.
We know that the amygdala and the hippocampus are deeply intertwined. When information has personal emotional relevance, the brain tags it as high priority for long-term storage.
It makes it matter.
The vocabulary ceases to be abstract academic trivia and becomes a functional tool for self-expression.
That makes total sense. I mean, it's the difference between memorizing the word for coffee to pass a test versus using the word to explain that you desperately need a cup to survive the morning.
The stakes encode the memory deeper, even minor stakes.
But the document pushes this even further with the conversation practice.
Yeah.
And I have to say, the mechanics outlined for this specific exercise feel almost avant-garde.
It's a really unique approach.
The teacher is instructed to construct a short dialogue of 5 to 8 turns. They deliver their line, leave the learner's part entirely blank, wait 5 seconds, and then continue naturally.
It is an asymmetrical conversation, basically a highly structured conversational simulator.
I think about it from a theatrical perspective. It's like an actor doing a scene with an invisible partner whose script has been completely redacted.
Like acting against a green screen.
Yes. You deliver your prompt, you sit in 5 seconds of total silence while the student supposedly fills the void, and then you have to deliver your next line in a way that feels completely organic and logical, regardless of what the student just said.
The empathetic foresight required by the teacher to pull that off is incredible.
It really is.
It requires the teacher to utilize predictive processing. They have to anticipate the narrow band of likely responses an A2 learner might produce in that specific context.
And then engineer their follow-up lines to serve as a universal catch-all.
Right. They have to remain encouraging and conversational, whether the student provides a perfect 10-word sentence or stumbles through a 3-word fragment.
So, like, if the teacher asks, "Did you have a good weekend?" and the blank space is filled by the student saying, no, I was very sick, the teacher's pre-scripted next line cannot be, "That sounds wonderful."
Exactly. That would be a disaster. They have to design prompts that gently guide the learner down a predictable path without making it feel like an interrogation.
The genius of this 5 to 8 turn simulation is that it forces the learner to practice the rhythmic volley of real-world communication, the back-and-forth turn-taking.
Without the paralyzing pressure of a completely unscripted, free-flowing debate.
Conversation is exhausting for a beginner because it requires constant, rapid-fire context switching between listening and speaking.
This structured void allows them to build the necessary cognitive stamina with the safety rails firmly in place.
So after that intense period of active, unscripted production, the heavy lifting of the session is essentially complete. But a good builder doesn't just erect the walls and walk away.
You have to cure the concrete.
Exactly. The lesson structure pivots into the science of reinforcement to ensure that the neural pathways formed today don't completely degrade by tomorrow.
And this section covers pronunciation, review, and homework.
Yes, and the strict quantitative constraints return here.
They do, beginning with pronunciation. The instructor is directed to choose exactly 5 important words, repeat them twice, provide an easy sentence, and explicitly indicate the words stress.
I want to linger on the concept of word stress because I think it's a mechanical feature of English that native speakers are entirely blind to.
Oh, completely.
We are a stress-timed language, which means the rhythm of our sentences is dictated by the stressed syllables, not the total number of syllables.
Right.
If a learner hits the wrong syllable, they aren't just speaking with a heavy accent. They are actively changing the acoustic signature of the word to the point of incomprehensibility.
That acoustic signature is vital for retrieval in a native speaker's brain. The classic demonstration of this is noun-verb differentiation.
Oh, give us an example.
We'll take the word spelled R-E-C-O-R-D. If you emphasize the first syllable, R-E-chord, the brain categorizes it as a physical object or a document.
Like a vinyl record.
But if you emphasize the second syllable, record, the brain categorizes it as an action.
To record a podcast. Or a deep dive, rather.
Exactly.
Or think about how the vowels physically mutate, like the word photograph. Photograph has distinct, clear O and A sounds.
Right.
But if I change the stress to the second syllable, it becomes photographer. The first O turns into a lazy sound.
A schwa.
The acoustic shape of the word completely morphs based entirely on the stress.
Expecting an A2 learner to intuit that wildly inconsistent system is totally unfair. So by explicitly mapping the stress on those 5 critical words, the teacher is providing the rhythmic sheet music, not just the lyrics.
That's a beautiful way to say it. And following the pronunciation tuning, the document outlines the review section. Once again, it mandates exact quotas.
Yes, review exactly 10 vocabulary words, 5 useful sentences, and 3 grammar points. These numbers align perfectly with what cognitive psychologists understand about mental fatigue and the consolidation of memory.
By the end of a lesson, the brain's working memory is exhausted. The metaphorical sponge is completely saturated.
If an instructor attempts to review 25 words and 8 grammar rules at the end of a session, they trigger interference.
It's just too much data.
The sheer volume of data prevents the hippocampus from properly consolidating the information into long-term memory. It all just devolves into noise.
So less is actually more.
By strictly limiting the review to 10 words, 5 sentences, and 3 grammar rules, the curriculum acknowledges the biological reality of the forgetting curve.
It represents the optimized maximum load that can realistically survive the transition from short-term processing to long-term storage. It's an exercise in ruthless prioritization. You accept that you cannot save everything, so you secure the absolute most vital structural pillars. Finally, this reinforcement phase extends beyond the classroom via the homework instructions. The blueprint prescribes 5 speaking questions, a highly constrained writing task of strictly 50 words, and 5 shadowing sentences.
Shadowing is a particularly potent technique that deserves some exploration here.
Yeah, let's get into it.
It requires the learner to listen to a sentence spoken by a fluent speaker and repeat it back almost simultaneously, aiming to perfectly mimic the prosody, rhythm, and pronunciation.
What I find fascinating about shadowing is that it fundamentally isn't a cognitive exercise.
No, it's really not.
You aren't pausing to analyze the syntax or parse the verb tenses. It feels much closer to athletic training.
Because it is fundamentally a motor skill exercise. When a learner is shadowing, they are driving neuroplasticity in the motor cortex.
It's a physical workout for the mouth.
They are forcing the muscles of their mouth, jaw, and vocal cords to fire in unfamiliar sequences. It builds the physical muscle memory required for articulation.
Bridging the gap between declarative knowledge, knowing a word exists in your mind, and procedural knowledge, which is the physical dexterity to produce it fluidly on demand.
Perfectly said.
So we have mapped out the entire mechanical engineering of this blueprint. We've explored the working memory constraints of the 5 to 12 word sentences, the neurological empathy of the 5-second silence.
That's the prosodic training of the micro stories too?
Right. And the predictive processing of the blank dialogues and the hippocampal consolidation of the review quotas.
It is an incredibly sophisticated, formidable machine.
But a machine is only as good as its operating system. It needs a governing philosophy to direct how these mechanics are actually deployed.
And that philosophy is explicitly stated in the final section of the document. The important rules.
These rules serve as the ultimate directive, overriding and informing every mechanical step we've discussed so far.
The very first instruction is always speak naturally like a friendly teacher and encourage me.
It demands that the delivery mechanism completely masks the highly structured machinery operating underneath.
Yes. Even though the instructor is privately executing a rigid algorithm, counting syllables, timing their sciences, tracking their 3 grammar points, The learner must never feel the cold metal of that framework.
They must only feel the warmth of genuine human connection.
Because if the learner feels like they are just being processed by a syllabus, all the psychological safety we discussed regarding the warm-up instantly evaporates.
And that brings us to the most vital sentence in the entire document, the thesis statement that governs the entire methodology. Focus on speaking confidence more than grammar perfection.
This is huge. In the study of second language acquisition, there is a foundational concept known as the effective filter hypothesis, originally proposed by Stephen Krashen.
This is where the intersection of emotion and neurology becomes absolutely undeniable.
The hypothesis posits that a learner's emotional state acts as a filter that either facilitates or entirely blocks language acquisition.
Like a wall going up.
But if we look at it through modern neuroscience, it's not just a metaphorical filter. It is a chemical reality.
Right.
When a learner is highly anxious, afraid of making a mistake, or feeling judged, their body releases cortisol, the primary stress hormone.
And what does cortisol do?
High levels of cortisol actually inhibit the hippocampus's ability to encode new memories. You can present the most perfectly structured 5 to 12 word sentence to a stressed learner, and their brain will literally fail to absorb the linguistic data because it's too busy managing the systemic threat response.
So anxiety is the absolute enemy of fluency, period. By explicitly commanding the teacher to prioritize confidence over grammar perfection, the document is acknowledging that the ultimate utility of language is communication, not algorithmic, textbook accuracy.
Exactly.
I know, however, that there is a traditionalist pushback to this philosophy.
How there always is.
There are educators and listeners who ignore grammar perfection and think, wait, aren't you just reinforcing bad habits? If you don't correct their mistakes immediately, aren't you teaching them to speak incorrectly?
It is a common critique, but it fundamentally misunderstands the developmental sequence of complex skill acquisition.
I always compare it to the developmental milestones of a toddler learning to walk.
Oh, that's perfect.
When a child pulls themselves up on the edge of the couch, takes their first wildly unbalanced asymmetrical step, and immediately collapses onto the floor, the parents don't rush over with a clipboard to critique the biomechanics of the stride.
Right. They don't point out that the center of gravity was misaligned.
No. They cheer. They celebrate the attempt itself.
Exactly. Because if you critique the structural failure of the first step, the child's effective filter goes up, and they may simply refuse to take a second one.
The biomechanical perfection of the stride will naturally correct itself over years of continuous, confident practice. The exact same principle applies here.
It really does.
Yeah.
If an A2 learner says, yesterday I go to store, their grammar is undeniably incorrect, but their communication is entirely successful.
You know exactly who went, where they went, and when they went.
If the teacher interrupts that successful communication to correct the irregular past tense of the verb to go, they have abruptly prioritized the academic rule over the human connection.
They've signaled to the learner that accuracy is more important than expression.
And that instantly spikes the cortisol, raises the effective filter, and guarantees that the next time the learner have a thought, they will second-guess themselves into silence rather than risk another correction.
The document is demanding that the teacher protect the momentum at all costs. Confidence is the engine that drives the car. Grammar is just the steering wheel. A perfectly calibrated steering wheel is completely useless if the car doesn't have the power to move forward.
Protect the momentum, maintain the encouragement, and utilize the structural constraints to ensure that the learner never feels overwhelmed by the complexity of the task ahead.
So what does this deep dive mean for us, for you, the listener, navigating a world far removed from an A2 English classroom?
We have spent the last hour dissecting an intensely specific instructional blueprint.
We've analyzed the rigorous discipline required to limit your thoughts to 12 words, the biological empathy required to sit in a 5-second silence without interrupting, and the structural genius of using constraints to prevent cognitive overload.
We've uncovered how a system of strict limitations, which initially appears restrictive and cold, is actually a meticulously engineered mechanism for creating psychological safety.
We've seen how enforcing pauses, capping word counts, and stripping away cultural idioms creates a pristine, distraction-free environment where the human brain is optimized to learn, connect, and thrive without the paralyzing fear of judgment.
And that is a psychological principle that scales far beyond language acquisition.
It demands that we audit our own daily communication habits. How frequently do we overwhelm our colleagues, our partners, or our children simply because we lack the intentional discipline to edit our own thoughts before we speak?
It's definitely something we're all guilty of.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you step back into your day. We exist in a culture that worships infinite information and boundless avenues for self-expression. We are conditioned to believe that having total freedom, the freedom to say whatever we want for as long as we want, is the ultimate good.
But consider the areas of your life where you might actually be suffering from the sheer weight of that abundance.
Think about the next complex presentation you have to give, or a deeply difficult, emotionally charged conversation you need to have with a loved one. What if, instead of preparing a massive, meandering monologue filled with caveats and complex justifications, you applied artificial constraints to yourself?
What if you forced yourself to distill the core of your argument into 5 to 12-word sentences?
What if, the next time you were asked a challenging question, you enforced a mandatory, unwavering 5-second pause before you replied, gifting both your brain and theirs the grace of unhurried processing time? What if embracing these rigid, seemingly unnatural constraints could actually make you a dramatically more effective, more empathetic, and ultimately more confident communicator? Something to think about.